The initial estimates for what was called the Canadian Surface Combatant were not well done. They were initially in old naval terminology written on the back of a cigarette pack. And, the first estimate was actually a guesstimate on how much it would cost to replace the Halifax-class.
This is the Expert Series podcast from the CDA Institute, Canada's premier defense and security think tank. I'm Josh Malm, and it's Friday, September 5th, 2025.
We're here to begin a new chapter in the proud history of the Royal Canadian Navy. Today, we are officially launching construction for the Canadian Surface Combatant Project. And this project is going to deliver a new fleet of 15 warships for the Royal Canadian Navy. It is the largest shipbuilding initiative that Canada has undertaken.
The River-class destroyer is needed to address the aging and retiring fleet of Iroquois and Halifax-class warship, whose capabilities no longer meet current and future operational demands. These new ships will ensure Canada maintains a credible naval presence to support national defense, international alliances, and emerging security challenges, particularly in strategic regions like the Indo-Pacific and the Arctic. Today, Tim Addison joined us to discuss the River-class destroyer's key role as Canada's next-generation surface combatant. Tim will discuss the primary mission of the ships, detail the ship's advanced sensor and command systems and other capabilities, and address how these technological advancements support naval intelligence gathering and diplomacy. We also touch on the integration challenges within the Canadian fleet and spoke candidly about procurement complexities and cost management under the National Shipbuilding Strategy. This is the Expert Series.
So we are focusing on another special interest today for the RCN and the development of the Navy in particular and defense spending with the development of the River-class destroyer, which will be a brand new fleet that will replace sections of the Royal Canadian Navy to better prepare Canada in the future for its increased involvement in international organizations and operations. Unlike other naval developments that we've been tracking at the Institute, take, for instance, the icebreaker announcements, which are far more Arctic focused in terms of their operational terrain. The River-class destroyer developments are combat-oriented and meant to be applied in NATO, NORAD, in intelligence capacities with our Five Eyes allies, other coalition environments. Could you walk us through some of the roles that the River-class destroyer can play in operation?
Yeah, certainly. So again, we cover a lot of this in our paper In Extremis, which is on our Naval Association website. But in essence, what we think, and from our experience as former members of the RCN, admittedly, we're a little bit dated. A lot of us retired, like myself, back in the 2006, 2010 timeframe. But we've stayed plugged in to just what's going on, and we have that baseline knowledge of how navies operate and what their roles and responsibilities are. So when you look at the River-class destroyer, it's going to replace the Halifax-class. That means primarily it's going to be a deployer, an international deployer, and typically Canada. It used to deploy its ships in task groups, 3 or 4 surface combatants, and an auxiliary vessel would go to another part of the world and conduct operations in support of a UN sanctions enforcement operation. Or if you go back far enough, you can look at the way we deployed a task group in the Korean War, or Operation Friction, Gulf War I, or even Apollo when we had a long-term deployment of ships in the Arabian Gulf. So a task group is key to what our Navy has always done, and I assume that it will be a key to the way we conduct operations in the future. So that's the primary big picture role of the River-class destroyer is to be the fighting end of that task group. 2 or 3 at a time deploying. When they get to an area, they're going to conduct various missions and tasks, primarily around sea control, to take a body of water and make sure that they completely understand everything that's going on under, on, and above that body of water. Now, it could be somewhere in the Pacific. It could be somewhere in the Arctic, offshore, obviously the ice-covered areas, etc. But you want to be able to know everything that's going on in that area of water, and with the weapons and sensors, particularly obviously the sensors that the River class destroyer will bring to that type of activity, it'll be well suited to that. It'll be able to operate with, as you suggested, other organizations such as NATO navies, allied navies. I'm thinking my biggest concern these days is what's going on potentially in the Asia-Pacific over the next 5 years. So I'm thinking about China and its veiled threats and sometimes overt threats towards Taiwan. I'm thinking about what it's being doing in Philippine waters and in Asia-Pacific waters in terms of denying other countries the right to fish legally. And so at some point in time, this is going to perhaps get a bit nastier, and there's going to be a requirement to respond with naval assets to go over and patrol those waters and conduct some kind of blockade or sanctions enforcement. Or if it gets nastier, perhaps we would be employed as escorts for a carrier air battle group, an American battle group. Our task group would be assigned perhaps the ASW roles to defend that carrier group. Those are the kinds of things that typically major warships do. We could also be, with the weapons and sensors that the River class are going to be fitted with, we could also be a surface warfare asset as well as a above water warfare asset. So there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, so you talked extensively about the Indo-Pacific, which is incredibly interesting because of the focus the Canadian government has placed on the Indo-Pacific through the Indo-Pacific strategy. Obviously, the primary focus of the country is going to be on the Arctic, but the Indo-Pacific is pretty high up there in terms of category. In terms of operations that could exist in the Indo-Pacific, service combatant is obviously a massive portion of the River class operational capacity. But a great deal of the Canadian presence in the Indo-Pacific is also our naval diplomacy. And you talked extensively about the sensor capabilities on the River class destroyer. So while combat oriented, I wonder if you could perhaps talk a little bit more as to the sensory and intelligence features, what that sort of naval intelligence will look like, perhaps in the Indo-Pacific, how that's going to contribute to naval diplomacy in the Indo-Pacific. But this additional capability beyond just being a combat-oriented ship, but also an intelligence-oriented ship.
Sure. Well, when you look at intelligence these days, back when I was in the Navy, it would tended to be operational intelligence or even tactical level intelligence. When you're out in a particular area of water that might be 1,000 by 1,000 nautical miles, you'd want to know everything that's going on in that particular chunk of water, and that would involve underwater sensors, towed arrays, hull-mounted sonars, ways of detecting and tracking underwater capabilities, i.e. submarines. Other than if we want to track our allies as well to make sure there's some water space management going on, and we don't have any issues with them. But we're looking to be able to detect and track enemy submarines. And the same would apply to above water assets when it comes to another nation's perhaps patrol aircraft, perhaps bomber aircraft. And then, of course, the worst case scenario is being attacked or knowing there's ongoing activity that involves missile type activity. So I think the River class are going to be well suited to that. They're going to be fitted with a command and control system that is, to a degree, an adaptation of Canada's own CMS system 330 developed originally for the Halifax class and modified, and the Halifax class is an upgrade. But then that core is going to be adapted to basically manage and talk to the other assets of the ship, being the sensors, the Spy 7 radar, some of the electronic warfare equipment. I believe it's the Slick 32 built by Raytheon that is going to be a part of the River class. There's obviously other weapons and sensors, a gun. These things are all going to be controlled by one common command and control system. And that is going to be the heart, the core of the ship.
What sets apart this new set of command and control capabilities from the Halifax class that comes before it, and how does it differ from the rest of the Royal Canadian Navy's current fleet?
Okay, so if you look back to the Halifax class, the systems that it employed were kind of 1980s, 1990s technology. Now we're taking a big step forward, going into a phased array radar at sea. Other navies have done this. The Americans have been doing it for years, but this will be, to my knowledge, the first time that Canada in particular has put a phased array radar in a surface platform and integrated it through the command and control system with all the other bits and pieces of the combat system. The key difference when you get to this integration point is what's known as the cooperative engagement capability that will be inherent in the River class. That's something that Canada's never done before. And what it means is that another navy or an allied force can go together, and if one particular ship, a command platform, is in a position where it feels that it needs you to fire your missiles, well, it can basically take control of your missile system and fire those missiles from you. Now, obviously, there's interfaces, there's all kinds of safety involved in this kind of an activity so that nobody on the firing platform would get hurt, but it's a significant step forward. And it's an American design system. They now have it at sea, and we're going to be a part of that. And it's also part of the way we have always integrated with the U.S. Navy and operated with them as an ally. And I'm sure that we're going to continue to do that going forward.
Do you feel as if the command and control system that's being applied to the new River class destroyer, especially as it's integrated along with our American allies, is it a first run in a potential expansion? Do you feel that there are capabilities on the River class destroyer that have the potential to be expanded onto other assets in the Canadian fleet, especially as we're looking at the icebreakers, the Coast Guard comes into national defense, and all of their assets become under national defense's purview? Is the River class destroyer a first blush at new technological advancements for the Royal Canadian Navy?
Well, certainly some of the components that are going to be in the River class destroyer are going to be available to be put into other classes of ships. Now, I'm thinking primarily the replacement for the Kingston class, the coastal defense vessels that are currently in service. They're now being taken out of service, actually. But the RCN is getting ready to, I believe, launch a project which will replace those vessels with about a 25 to 3,000 ton, what they're calling a continental defense corvette. And that continental defense corvette, no doubt, will have some of the capabilities of the River class. It may not have all of them. It may not have the same number of missiles. It may not have the same size gun, but it'll have a lot of similarities to the River class.
I guess we could move on to some of the more political aspects.
Let me just go back to the other part of your question,
Sure.
which was related to the other classes, the other vessels. Now, some of these platforms, for example, the Protector class, they're going to be fitted with some capabilities. But in the past, AORs have always had a gun. They've always had, they've been fitted with close-in defense systems. And, those things can be accomplished. The Coast Guard is going to operate pretty much the same way as it does now, to my knowledge. There will be some more interface, but that'll be at the tactical level. But the Coast Guard isn't fitted with, right now, any of the systems that they could interact on an operational basis with a River-class destroyer, or for that matter, even a Continental Defense corvette. In terms of operations, in terms of communication during an operation, most of that is done with secure networks. Coast Guard doesn't have any of that. They don't have the radio systems, they don't have the crypto systems, and they don't really have an operations room. Most of their operations are conducted from the bridge. And the operations they do, yeah, the operations they do are very specific to, what a Coast Guard does. Yes, they do a lot of search and rescue, and the Navy does search and rescue if it happens to be in the vicinity of a potential search and rescue operation. They can be tasked or they can volunteer to be engaged in it. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be doing much more than that, talking on an open air VHF radio to communicate with the Navy about what their operations are and how to carry out the SAR.
Now, I want to save this for later, but you've touched on it so wonderfully, because I wanted to ask you about the integration of the Canadian Coast Guard into national defense as part of that purview. So we're not going to see the Coast Guard ramp up in a way to work with the Royal Canadian Navy outside of the normal purview now.
I don't see it happening right away, particularly with the current Coast Guard fleet. Over time, there may be some adjustments made. And as new Coast Guard vessels are introduced, they may have some upgrades, they may have some capabilities added to them. But again, the Coast Guard's got its own mandate, its own operations to conduct in the Arctic, obviously ice breaking and resupply, and even along the coast. They do a lot of things along the coast in terms of surveillance related to pollution control. They do some support to the other branch of what used to be called, what is called DFO, Fisheries and Oceans. They go out and do those kinds of fisheries patrols and those sorts of things. The Navy, in my day, used to do that too. I don't know how much we do anymore. But again, those are all fairly low level. They don't require a lot of classified or communications that are encrypted. And you don't have to operate an operations room to build a big picture of what's going on, other than perhaps a surface plot.
And so if the Canadian Coast Guard will not see higher coalition work, especially through the River-class, perhaps with the icebreakers, why do you think the Canadian government has moved forward in integrating the Coast Guard under national defense?
Well, there's a couple of reasons why, and this is I think a sensitive subject for a few people. To me, it's obvious that bringing Coast Guard in under defense, it's going to remain a special operations agency. It's going to remain under the command, if you want to call it command, of a commissioner of the Coast Guard, and that commissioner is going to report to the Minister of National Defense. So it's just going to be another arm of national defense. It's going to carry out its normal mandate for the foreseeable future. But the big thing around this is the money spent on the Coast Guard is going to come under DND's spending envelope. So doesn't that fall nicely into the category of increasing spending towards that initially 2% of GDP target, and then beyond that?
So we went on a bit of a Coast Guard tangent. We do have to talk about the elephant in the room, which is funding. In addition to the political nature of the development of the River-class destroyer, they're going to rely heavily on American-made components. You touched on it lightly when you talked about the Raytheon system. The price tag to build the fleet is currently projected at $77 billion. How can the River-class destroyer avoid the politicization issues of procurement that we've seen with other aspects of the Canadian procurement system? The classic example is the F-35. What can the Canadian government do in order to ensure that this capability is built and structured for the Royal Canadian Navy without it facing the same blockages that it's seen in the past?
Well, I think we're beyond that, actually. The River-class destroyer is in build. Yes, perhaps they have not totally locked down the design, but they've got to a point now where they're starting to build the first River-class destroyer, HMCS Fraser, in Irving's shipyard in Halifax. Yes, it's going to cost a lot of money. We've known that from day one. Nobody could predict the way things would escalate in terms of cost as a result of things like COVID, and I'm not going to make excuses for that or say that is an excuse. It's just a fact of life. The initial estimates for what was called the Canadian Surface Combatant were not well done. They were initially in old naval terminology written on the back of a cigarette pack. And, the first estimate was actually a guesstimate on how much it would cost to replace the Halifax-class. But that number stuck forever thanks to the media. They jumped on that number and they basically kept putting it up there as the original cost of the Canadian Surface Combatant, when in fact it was just an estimate on replacement. Then it went forward and the costs over time have increased. Well, that's just the way things go when you get into long-term shipbuilding projects. And again, I'm not making excuses for it. Everything's gone up in terms of price, and perhaps the original lowball estimates, which were done to basically get the project going, in hindsight, were probably not the best way to do the early estimates for this project. But now that it's up and running, I think they're much more accurate in terms of their budgetary forecasts. Probably going to go up again before we see delivery of the first or second ship. But the beauty will be in building 15 of them. The cost per ship will go down significantly, and that's been proven by the build of the AOPS. The time taken to build the ships and the cost per ship, because of the reduced labor involved in terms of hours by the builders, that's going to go down. Cost of the ship will go down. Things will tighten up, and as things move forward, I'm sure that we'll be getting good value for our money.
Can I push back on you a little bit?
As a taxpayer. Sure, go ahead.
So I absolutely hear what you're saying in terms of mass development. 15 ships are going to get integrated into the fleet. They're already being built in Irving shipyards, and I'm going to ask you about the National Shipbuilding Strategy in a minute. But when looking at the F-35, that deal was signed, and those jets were meant to be delivered, and the factor of them being American jets have caused controversy in the Canadian government and subjected that deal to significant review. It's still under review now, well into the next Liberal government. And so, what is your answer to folks who might be worried that the aspects of the River-class destroyer, the aspects of the ship built by Lockheed Martin, by Raytheon, will be subject to review and be blocked by the current ongoing trade war?
I don't see that happening. I think that those issues will go away. The concerns will go away, just as they are going away with the F-35. Everybody realizes that we need to replace our F-18s. The F-35 has been long sought after by the Royal Canadian Air Force in terms of this is the fleet of aircraft that we want. And yeah, there's been hiccups along the way. There's been many hiccups with the F-35, but Canada contributed or invested hundreds of millions of dollars way back when. So why would we want to walk away from that? And over time, we're very close with the F-35 to basically moving it forward. Yes, again, there's been some recent hiccups because of tariffs and all that. But I think at the end of the day, we'll end up buying the F-35s. And the same will go for the River class. Yes, there's some concerns, government to government, tariffs, etc. But we're dealing with Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin has an office in Canada. They've been at the core of the CCS 330 development over many, many years. And they are not a government. They are a corporation. And they're going to do, they've got a contract to fulfill. And all this talk about possibly, going back to the F-35, the idea that we couldn't operate the planes because somebody down in the United States was toggling a button that wouldn't allow us to fly them, or, that's just not going to happen. That's not true. That's not factual. And that the same with the River class. Yes, we're going to have this cooperative engagement capability, but it's not going to be this sort of scenario where Canada does not have control of its assets. There's, in anything to do with the Navy, the captain of a warship always has the veto capability. If he doesn't want to fire a missile, he can stop it. I'm sure that will be integrated into the system. If it's not, well, we better end this conversation now.
Hey, I had to ask.
Sure. Yeah, I get it.
In addition to the external capabilities, the real jewel of the Royal Canadian Navy's development over the past few years has been the National Shipbuilding Strategy. It is performed again and again through the River class destroyer, through the icebreaker agreements that we're beginning to see with the U.S. Coast Guard and with our Scandinavian allies in terms of being able to develop forward with new naval technology that will serve not only the NATO alliance better later on, but also the Canadian Navy in terms of being able to protect the Arctic. How has the strategy changed the way that Canada procures and develops its naval fleet since perhaps you were an active sailor and since this strategy came into place in the past few years?
Well, in essence, when I was still serving, we didn't have a strategy. The strategy was developed in around the 2012 timeframe, thanks to some brilliant people, one of them being Rear Admiral retired Ian Mack, and a number of people on his staff in the RCN, and across government, really. There were a number of other players whose names escape me right now, but when they came together and put together a plan that would see shipyards on both coasts occupied with building ships for both combat and non-combat roles, that was the way forward, and that really has to continue. We have an opportunity now with this Continental Defense Corvette. It's potentially going to be outside the basis of the National Shipbuilding Strategy in terms of that strategy was focused on C-SPAN on the West Coast, building non-combatants, i.e. ships for the Coast Guard and the joint support ships for the RCN. And on the East Coast, Irving building the Arctic offshore patrol ships and then what's now the River class destroyers. And now we've got Davy coming into the middle now that they are basically solvent again. They weren't solvent in the sort of 2012 timeframe, and they unfortunately were not included in the original National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy, as it was then known. But we're coming around to that. They're getting engaged in building icebreakers, etc. There are other shipbuilding operations in Canada, on the Great Lakes, for example, and on the East Coast, who could build smaller warships. It just, the studies have to be done, and some aspects of it have to be ironed out. But these are all potentially good things to keep a bigger, broader national shipbuilding strategy going, and one that will continue on long beyond the build of the River-class destroyers. In our paper, we said just that. Let's not have the typical flash to bang, build the ships, and then stop the production line. We need to keep building warships for Canada on both coasts and anywhere else that we can in the country, because it's good for the economy. It's generating jobs. It's generating revenue for government. It's generating all the things that we need for economic prosperity in this country.
So before we wrap up today, I always
Sure.
like to ask, is there anything that you think the general public should know about the River-class destroyer, about naval procurement, that we didn't get to touch on today?
The River-class destroyer is definitely the most complex thing that we've ever built in Canada. The only thing that would be more complex would be if we built a submarine in Canada, and that's not going to happen. But the River-class destroyer is definitely, to date anyway, the most complex thing we've ever undertaken. That means there's going to be potentially some issues with it when the first ship is delivered. They've very smartly created a shore-based test facility that's being built in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and Eastern Passage. It's being called HMCS Assiniboine, which is near and dear to my heart, my first operational ship when I was a young officer. And that's where they're going to test the combat system of the first ship. And I think that's a brilliant way to do business. Before you try to put it to sea and get everything to work, let's get it to work in a shore-based test facility, and that can be done these days. But on the other aspects of the ship and the class of ships, yeah, there's going to be some issues that'll crop up. It happens with every new build. It happened with AOPS. There were some things with AOPS that didn't work very well. And they're all being rectified, or they have been rectified. We need to be aware that these things happen, and the general public has to accept the fact that that's just what happens when you build a brand new class of ship. Can't predict what these problems might be, but there will be problems, I guarantee it.
On that very high note, Tim Addison from the Naval Association of Canada, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
My pleasure, Claire. It's been a pleasure to chat with you, and I look forward to any comments or questions that may come about as a result of our conversation. I'm sure there will be a few, because there's a few people out there who may pick up on this and have something to say.
Hey, we'll send them your way.
And I'm quite happy to be corrected on anything that I've said today. I'm by no means an expert, just a former Navy guy with an abiding interest in our Royal Canadian Navy and what makes Canada the best country in the world to live in.
And that's all for today's episode. If you want to learn more about the CDA Institute, follow us on social media, visit our website at cdainstitute.ca, or subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates on Canadian defense and international security. If you have comments or feedback about what you heard in today's edition, email Josh at cdainstitute.ca. I'm Josh Malm. Until next time.